it's a pleasure to have some time just to chat. And as you'll see in the slides in a minute, I really see this as sort of a conversation and discussion, not a technical training session. I don't think that's the intent, but I want to share some thoughts that, that I certainly have uncovered in the field. If you count my year of internship at Caltrans when I was in college as an undergraduate, I'm 48 years in now. So it's been an amazing ride in career, and I have no intention of leaving it. So it's been wonderful. Again, thank you all for being here, and I appreciate it. One of the things that I think is important as we begin this discussion of why early planning matters, this is not a tough concept. I mean, it's not a tough topic because I think everybody on the call probably understands it. What I hope is as we go through this is that from my experiences and the things that I've done with organizations is to share hopefully one or two things throughout the course of the slides that somehow grab you, or meaningful to you, and maybe help to have a conversation with someone else when you're going through that process of when do we plan, how do we plan, what's best to plan, and I'll give you some thoughts on that. There's no question that early planning is the right thing. One of I think the advantages for me of having been in the field for a while now is that I've been through many of the transitions of what we think of in the safety profession. And, when I was in college, it was really OSHA had not been out that long. And so it was about regulatory compliance. It was a compliance-driven sort of mindset for safety. And then it sort of migrated into the hazard management, or what we might think of more as the traditional piece. Then it migrated into behavior, and then to safety one, and now safety two, and HOP, and all the things that are really important. They're all important. They're critical for us to know, and they're great for us to be able to apply as we move through thinking about planning and when we plan. So just a couple little comments there to get things started. But building safety the right way and why early planning matters, will sort of go through that. And I think today, as I said, I really just want to have a conversation. And I love Ralph Waldo Emerson's quote here that the best of life is a conversation. I can't tell you how much more I get out of sitting and talking with people than sort of the old didactic way of just driving information to folks. And I taught in the colleges for 25 years and really appreciated those opportunities. But so I welcome your questions. I welcome your comments, and we'll get to those. And thank you for that. But today is about kind of a discussion and better understanding, or hopefully some understanding of what this topic's about. So I've broken this up into five sections, and the first one is several slides on kind of my perspective on things, and then getting into using an avatar for construction in part 2, 3, and 4 about pre-construction considerations, structural, and then post-con things, and then part 5 is really sort of wrapping up and final comments and things. So that's how this is oriented. So we're going to jump into part 1 here and begin that discussion. But early means a lot of different things to different people. I've talked to people before where early means, well, when you show up at the job site, we start talking about safety. I don't really see that as early. I see it as at the time, and I don't know if that's the best way to do things. So, my perspective is that early frames the presentation, and early is what you see on the screen there. It's before something, it's ahead of time, it's prior, in advance, and the more we can do that, and the more we can build those things in. And I think all of you on the discussion today probably think this way as well. In my 48 years of doing this, I can tell you that I've been to thousands of businesses, and they don't all agree with this. Well, they may agree with it, but they don't practice it. And so today, this is as much about, can we practice it and can we get better at it? If you go back to the first slide, you'll note that building is upside down. It's upside down for a reason, because in the lack of planning, things don't go the way we want. And we certainly want to overcome things like that. But there's a piece of this early planning that I will lever here, and I'm sincere about it. And that lever is leadership. Um, Regardless of where you are in your organization, what level of the organization you're in, leadership, of course, we can all be leaders, right? We don't have to have the title. We don't have to have the position. We can all be leaders, especially in safety. Everybody can be a safety leader. And I know I'm talking to the choir about doing the right thing and planning early, and I certainly appreciate that. But this leadership piece, this intention-based leadership piece is critical in safety. I became, oh, maybe 15 years ago, kind of an acolyte of David Marquet's work. And I think it's important. If you have an opportunity, you ought to pick this book up if you have it. He's got some cool things on YouTube if you go listen to him about turning the ship around. I forget what that methodology is, where they sort of make comics like they do in the image there. But it's pretty cool about what he did to turn this Navy Santa Fe ship around, and how he changed his mindset in safety and in operations from kind of telling people what to do to asking people what they intended to do. It was kind of an amazing shift for me in terms of thinking. And so I would ask the same question: what is our intention when we early plan? When? How early? What is early? But again, I would encourage you to, if you get a chance, pick up that book. And he's had two or three more. He's got a thing that he puts out once a week, I think. It's like a little thing on the internet, or the web rather, where he'll send it to your email. It's a cool little thing to think about. So you can go to his website and sign up for that as well. Just something to think about. And really, it's less about David Marquet, Captain Marquet, great guy. I've met him and engaged with him a little bit, but it's about this intention-based piece, because I think we need to be intentional about the early planning aspect of safety. And that's the reason that that's so important for us is that a lot of folks can say, you know what, I plan early, I think about it, and thinking about it and doing it are different things, right? But I think about it and things still don't work out properly. We all know what the ramifications are in construction sites when things don't go well. We've experienced them, we've read about them. I've investigated some catastrophic injuries. And there are things that range from construction vehicles backing over people to people falling off structures. And of course, they're all terrible events, and we want to stop them. And that planning piece has a dynamic that is both in the program element as well as ultimately the engineering piece. And I know you all think about that. You look at a structural building, the gentleman who was just named the senior vice president of ASSP, for example, Tom Kramer, is a fall protection expert. And he would tell you that in prevention through design, that when you build a big structure, you go ahead and build in the fall protection anchors before you leave the building, right? So that whoever has to go up there in the future, they're already there. You don't have to worry about trying to figure it out. But planning helps, but it doesn't always ensure understanding. My experience is that we get together and we talk. We have some discussion about safety and what we're going to do. And so that a lot of people shake their head, right? And they go, yeah, I get it. Okay, fine. And then when you go back later, it's like, well, wait a minute, what happened to that conversation we had? But I think it's how you plan. It's the setting up the expectations. It's the embedding of safety early in the process. Every project has an early. It's pre something, and we'll get into that in a minute. So it's when you plan, and I think more importantly, who you plan with that makes the difference. Decision makers, leaders, those who can commit, those who are willing to embed safety into the process. Now, safety for me is a broad word. It's not just a word about hazards. It's not just a word about training. It's not just a word that is configured to help us with the regulatory compliance piece. It's all of that and more. And I think when I say safety, I mean safety, health, risk management, all of that stuff. So I'll use safety just as an easy word so I don't have to keep adding on as we go through. But I think that this how you plan, when you plan, and who you plan with is kind of a functional attribute of good leadership. And again, you don't have to be the CEO of the organization to be a leader when it comes to safety. So think about it from that perspective. the kind of wrapping up on my perspective, we're in my perspective of things now that, I often tell people that we don't do safety to people, we do safety with people. There's an advantage there, organic advantage to the incorporation of the spirit of safety, the dynamic of how important it is and why it's so valuable. I remember as a young safety guy, people would say to me, well, what's the economic advantage? What's the financial advantage of being safe? Go on, I don't know, you have less incidents, I guess. Ultimately, we get better at that and we can figure out the cost. We can figure out if we reduce X number of these things, what it means to us in terms of the ability to be competitive, the ability to drive down experience modification rates, the ability to be more competitive in the marketplace. And so we get more sophisticated at those dialogues. But one of the things that I see with planning is that organizations stack safety. And although there's value to having multiple plans or multiple skill sets or whatever it might be, and you stack them, stacking sometimes is not safe. It's not secure. Layering, on the other hand, is. And so the distinction between stacking and layering is subtle, but I think it's organic, it's important. Layering, for example, it's almost like putting together a composite layer of materials to strengthen the substance of something that you're building or making. It's that configuration, it's that depth, it's the dimension and how it is structured that makes it stronger. So when you look at early planning, think about one, working with whomever you are, whether it's a sub, whether it's somebody else in your organization, whether it's the general, whomever it might be, or wherever you are in that spectrum, that you do things with people when it comes to safety and you do it early, not to them. In other words, it's one thing to tell somebody they got to do it. Look, I'm okay with looking at somebody in the field and saying, you can't do that because it's going to hurt you and we got to stop it. And, we understand the value of that sort of dialogue, and there's ways to get that across, of course. But when it comes to planning, when it comes to building, when it comes to the organic process of everybody being on the same page, we do things with each other, right? We don't do it to them. And again, this layering piece, I think if you think about the substance of the safety programs we have and how we build them, especially as a construction project moves along and there's different elements of safety that have to be built in, this layering thing becomes important. Again, Dan's perspective, organic, important to me and those I've worked with, but just something to think about. As we sort of wrap up the perspective piece, I think about early planning from the standpoint of what is it a sign of? If we are early planning and we haven't defined, I've sort of given you what I meant by early, certainly before you start. But is early planning a sign of, what is it a sign of? Is it the work of an MBA? This is a rhetorical question. You can fill in the blank as you see fit, but is it to avoid citations? Is early planning the sign of being a good corporate citizen? Is it a sign of leadership or an investment? You can see the rest. Or is it about alignment rather? Alignment with, some of you may have adopted some work management systems like ANSI Z10 or others that you may have secured in the commercial market. ISO 45001, the alignment with those if you've adopted these. But more important, it's bigger than that. It's bigger. The alignment is that everybody that's on a site is in alignment about what you're trying to do, about what you're trying to accomplish, and about what the mission is of that organization. I run a division in our company that's got people around the country, and the regional leaders report to me, and we go through this process every year of trying to get people aligned to understand and remember what our mission and vision is, and that everything they do has to be sort of connected to that. And, I certainly have been on construction sites where it is obvious that somebody is not in alignment. And I don't know, maybe sometimes the earliest thing in that alignment is housekeeping. It's like I'd say to contractors, you can't keep a place clean. How can you keep it safe? And that's pretty basic stuff, but it's important, and you want people to be aligned and all of that. But I don't know on this list of 6 or 7 things, is one better than the other? You can answer that question. For me, it's a little rhetorical, but I think it's important. And I think all these things apply, by the way. I think they're all part of that matrix of why early planning is important and why and what it's a sign of. I kind of lean to the leadership piece of things, but I think these are all important. I also think here that safety and early planning is an investment. It's an investment in doing the right thing and doing it early and making sure that everybody's on the same page, so to speak, right? Well, it is the right thing. Planning early is the right thing. It shows a a sensitivity to being held accountable for what we're supposed to do. Um, I think it's about all of us. It's about the whole complex of who we're engaged with. It's about you. It's about those. It's about the community. It's about your client, your subs, your employees, and their families. Their families are critical. Let me give you a quick example about um, an organization, and this was not a construction, but it was a mining operation, and they had a terrible record, just terrible. And the guy could not figure out how to change this. It was surface mining. Experienced mod was 230, 240, somewhere in there. So we started working together, and then one day he says, "Dan, I figured it out." And I said, "Well, what did you do to figure it out?" He says, I'm not gonna do safety with the employees anymore." I go, "Well, what do you mean? You have to. You're mine. You've got to follow MSHA and everything else." He said, "No, well, that stuff, yeah, I got to do the regulatory things." He says, "I'm going to their families." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I'm starting a program of recognition. If they do the right thing, their family can get something." So this gentleman sent catalogs home to, it was almost all guys, to their wives or their girlfriends or whomever, and said, "If your husband or boyfriend stays safe and doesn't get hurt, you can pick something out of this catalog." In 6 months, it was amazing the transition, because the people at home said, "I want that washer. I want that refrigerator. I want that jacket," whatever it was. And so in his mind, he shifted the entire complex. And is it a function of early? It's early in terms of the generation of his safety programming efforts. So there I give it the early thing. It was amazing the difference he made. But the comment there really is about the families and how important they are to the early planning piece, because he wanted his employees to go home well and whole. And as you know, mining can be pretty tough. Early planning and being successful creates opportunities for you. There's no question that the world starts to understand organizations, whether they're construction or others, that don't have good safety records or good corporate citizen records. That word gets out. And even if you think about it from the standpoint of doing work for the federal government or for the Army or somebody else, and your experience mod is greater than what they look for, whatever it might be, 1.25 or greater. And you have to answer those, why is it like that? And, to make yourself more competitive and have access to these opportunities. Of course, building safety in early is about the financial piece. There's no question. More competitive, more profitable. Yeah, you can share things with your employees, the reputation, the community, the regulatory compliance. The question about early planning is whether or not there's an ethical dynamic. And of course, I would say there is. Again, you can rhetorically answer that question for yourself. And I think that, ethical planning, ethical approach to safety ought to be the driving force, and it ought to be what leads leaders into doing the right thing. And it's also about overcoming what I refer to as assumptions in safety. And we'll talk about a couple of those in a minute. But hopefully those perspectives help a little bit. It just kind of wrapping up here, cost of risk, insurance and liability planning, all of these things where there is a financial component embedded. And the last bullet here, I think what's important is whether or not safety can be considered as a business development adjunct. Can your business development folks sell you better because of the safety work that you've done and the fact that you've planned early, you've embedded safety into your programs, and they get to tell you, because safety is about being on time. Safety is about cost. Safety is about so many things that can help drive how competitive you are in the marketplace. I get to go back in my role in BCSP, I get to go back to Minnesota next month and give someone an award for some work they've done and the progress they've made and the contributions they've made to their employees. And it is a construction company, but it's such a cool thing when people sort of grab this safety bull by the horn and they make it part of their world. And ultimately it is successful. There's absolutely no question about it. So the fact that something's on paper does not mean everyone's on the same page. I think we all agree with that and we understand it. Um, Thousands of visits I've made in my career, and people have safety programs and they show me their programs. And that's great. That's wonderful. Now, how do we validate it? How do we know that you're actually using it? And so this disconnect, and that disconnect does exist, and you probably have experienced it. But one of the ways that we can overcome this assumption about the fact that everything that's on paper does not mean everybody understands it on the same page and can do the same things, is to make sure we're validating the safety. And one of the ways to do that, the safety functionality, safety benefits, is to get into this thing early. And we'll define early here a little bit more in a second. But for me, I've sat down in lots of meetings and asked questions, and it was clear that folks had a great program on paper, but it was not really deployed. It was not functional, at least not well functioning. And you want to overcome that. So here's an analogy, if you will, and I love this quote, and I've used it before, that during World War II, when Churchill was the prime minister, he said, "You can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else." His point was this, that he wanted the Americans to get engaged in the World War II earlier than we did. He wanted us to get over there. We had tried backdoor politicking, we had tried sanctions, we had tried financial things. Nothing was working to stop the spread of the war over there. And the UK was going to fall if we didn't get involved. And so he was urging us to get involved. And this was one of the quotes that's been attributed to him. So what's the analogy with safety? He wanted us to get involved early. So if you look at this and you say, you can always count on the safety guy to do the right thing after they've done everything else, that's not the way to go about it, right? You want to do the right thing to begin with, and you want to do it at the right time with the right people. And I think ultimately what happened was Churchill cajoled us enough that we got involved. Roosevelt and others did not want, we retired from World War I. We did not want to do this. So I'm old enough that I'm not all that far away from World War II. My dad was a Marine and fought in Guadalcanal. So it was something that we talked about. But there is an analogy here that we can lever for safety, if you will. So some perspectives, some backgrounds, some places I've been, things I've done that have led me to come to some of these thoughts about the value and the importance of building what we will call, again, safety, the broad safety, into the process of construction, anything else that we do early. And that means before a hammer starts swinging or a crane starts moving steel or whatever the case might be. But so let's take that and move on into the kind of what I think are the analogizing the pre-con piece. And there are 6 things that I want to talk about. And I've said this before, but planning does not equal understanding. It helps, but it's not the same. And we have to overcome that discussion. What is a really good way of understanding whether or not, when you're in a planning meeting, if people are learning, if they're paying attention? Are they on their phone? Are they looking at their computer? Are they doing something else where you're saying something that you think is important as the safety person, but people aren't engaged, they're not embedded? And this embedding piece becomes really critical. Might have an organic element to it, might have a structural element to it, might have a granularity that's really important. And you can see the granularity here, that embedding from a pre-construction perspective, safety with the client, access, timing, certifications, anything else that happens, the planning for certain activities, the procurement of the right safety people, the right safety material, the right safety gear, all that goes into pre-design, what I talked about earlier with Tom Kramer and prevention through design. And that's taking a stronger and stronger aspect in the construction world now. But schedules and briefing and yeah, I say on the one hand, discipline, safety discipline, not disciplining people, is this process of embedding safety on one hand is agnostic, discipline agnostic. In other words, it's not specific to fall protection or PPE or whatever. On the other hand, early planning is a lot about that. So basically what that means is it's kind of on a spectrum, and we have to make sure we know where we are on that spectrum and whether or not we have to deploy certain disciplines at certain times. The embedding of safety early in the process should be and helps to meet your goals and objectives. There's no question about that. And it also helps you set expectations. Nothing wrong with setting expectations. My organization, we do a lot of work with construction companies around the country, whether it's OSIPs or individual projects. We do both. And the one thing that we recognize is how important it is to have expectations of the contractors we work with. What did I do here? So anyway, pre-considerations, pre-construction considerations that become important to us. 7 structural things that I think are critical. And all safety resides everywhere, but I think it's really important to understand that in the structure, and I'm talking not necessarily about the structure of a building, I'm talking about the structure of safety and where it resides in your organization. Structurally, safety should be built in. It should be part of it. It should be an organic part of who we are and what we do. What we see a lot is that folks have an organization and you're really good at something. You're really good at building something or making something. And then safety kind of gets stacked on top, goes back to that stacking thing. And I think my preference would be, and what my experience says, is that by layering and making it part of a composite element of what you're working on, things get better. So you look at all these places where the structural piece of safety needs to reside, and these are terms you're familiar with. I'm not sharing anything with you that you don't know, but safety and security systems are certainly growing, especially with the Internet of Things. I'm not sure if any of your organizations are knee deep into that, and you're building those things into the buildings you're working with, whether it's water intrusion, security systems, whatever the case might be. But all of this stuff, closure testing. And then I end with this piece about cycle and recycle. My experience is that safety is not linear. It's not a bunch of points on a line. It's cyclical. And you may get to a point in a project where you're doing some specific safety activity, totally get it, but it is part of a cycle. And that cycle never ends. And when you end a project, you might go, boy, glad that one's over with. And we made some money, we move on to the next. But the safety function does not end. And that cycling is about learning. It's about understanding what went well. It's about understanding what we might need to do differently and taking that and cycling it into the next project early in planning for safety, especially if it's the same kind of thing. And a lot of, obviously, contractors do the same types of activities time and time again. That's what you're good at. So again, overcoming some assumptions. Does the plan relate to what you measure? And identifying what you want to measure early becomes really critical, whether it's KPIs. That's my handwriting there, so you can see that I'm not an artist. But or are you looking at leading and lagging indicators? What are you measuring? And I think that the plan has to identify what it is you measure. Total recordable incident rate, frequency rates, whatever it is, whatever you're measuring, it's important to understand and to have those critical things relative to your project identified early, and you have the systems to pick that up. A lot of you, I suspect, are using work management systems or safety management systems, and, again, talked about in 45,001 and Z10, and there are others that are commercially available that lead you through the process of identifying what KPIs you need and how to measure them. I am a leading indicator advocate. Lagging is important, but the more that we can get into the leading world, I think the better we are. So that's kind of the structural piece, migrating into some of the closure, the wrap up of a project, and using that again as an avatar or and an analogy to embed safety in an organization early. I talked about this a second ago, that the earliest of safety planning is what you do to get ready for the next project. We see things move, and then there's a hard stop, and there's a gap, and then something else starts. And then the question is, what happens in between? Where is that gap? And my advocacy for the safety people is there is no gap. There's learning, there's understanding, there's recognizing what you're doing really well, and you want to layer your successes over your next project. You want to take advantage of those things you're really good at. You want to show that progression, but you also have to be honest about the things you need to work on. And I say again here that safety is not linear. It's cyclical, and I call it recycle, because you want to keep cycling through these projects and these activities, so that again, what you're good at, you perpetuate. What you're not good at, you try to get fixed up a little bit. So this is that. I think, are we at the end? Are we at the end of the discussion? Now we got a few more minutes. So I think about safety and its relationship to quality. And what I have found is that organizations that manage safety well tend to manage quality well, and vice versa. If it's a good quality organization, they tend to manage the safety part right. But the question that I have here is do we wait till the very end of a project to make sure that things have been safe or quality? And I think you all would say, no, that's not the way to do it. It's not what we do. We validate it along the way. So I don't know that there really is ever an end. I'm not an end guy. Totally get there's ends of projects and you got to move on to the next one. I got that. Close it up and you move on. But I think I would encourage us to think hard about where the safety. Let me say this a different way. I know that in the construction world, those who are responsible for quality measure it from minute one to minute end. My question is whether or not we do the same thing with safety. And if we think about the recycling piece I just talked about, that means that we're always embedding and doing safety things early. It's always early. It's never just do it at the beginning of a project. And that's the presumption for many people, is that our safety work is done at the beginning of a project in terms of the planning and the orientation. And then we move on, and then there's the application of some tactical safety things. And I'm saying, no, you just keep that cycle going, and you may have to reconfigure some things. Quality folks have that down to a science. Safety, I think, can get a little better at it. And we see it all the time in the clients that we work with. So are you wrapped up when your punch list is done? Is safety wrapped up when the punch list is finished? You've gone through your trials and tests, you've commissioned the building, you're ready to release it? I don't know. I mean, I think the answer is no. I don't think we're done there, right? What is this punch list? In essence, what does the punch list tell us, especially if it's got safety stuff in it? We think of punch lists as, the fixing the thing on the wall or making sure that we repair a door or whatever it might be. Every time, I've only bought 2 new houses in my life, but each time before we moved in, we went through with the contractor and we ended up with a punch list of things to work on. And then we moved in, or we moved in and then they finished it. I think it's more complex in the world you guys are in, but the point is that the punch list is also an element of where you can embed safety and should be embedding safety. So we've got a few more minutes here, but so I'm ready to move on to what I see as some of the concluding comments. And the last piece relative to the punch list, the to-dos, what we do, and as I said, the answer to the punch list question is no. I don't think that's the end. I think in many cases it's the beginning. If you think about some punch lists and how big they are and how aggressive they may be, that might be an indicator of what you need to plan for the next project. And the same thing happens in safety. Safety in the to-do piece becomes a form of due diligence. If you're working with subcontractors, I know you're evaluating their safety programs. That's part of your due diligence. What's their experience mod? What's their citation history with OSHA or Cal OSHA, or whatever state you may be in? What's their history with managing the cost of a project? You're evaluating all of these things, and that's part of the due diligence as to some subcontractor or vendor you may wish to use. And I think it's a great thing to do. But one of the things that you look at when you do that analysis is how have you and how have they managed changes? Lots of times I've been engaged with contractors where they say, and we do write some OSIPs where we comment on the general's use of certain subcontractors. We'll say, tell us why you're using this guy whose record is bad. We need to understand that because they're in the OSIP now. And they'll say, well, because we've known them forever, they're really good folks. They just had a couple tough years. So what's the rest of our dialogue about? We don't want to say no because we don't own the OSIP. We're insuring it. But it's more about, can you talk to us about how they change things, what they're doing differently than they did 3 years ago? How are they overcoming some of the hurdles? And I think that's an early dialogue as well. Things that are critical to document what you've done on the early side is this documentation to be able to tell your story, to be able to have that documentation and that dialogue there so it becomes defensible if and when something happens, like lawsuits, those sorts of things. Safety planning and who you engage, what's next, who do you talk to, who should you be asking to talk to when you get to these early things? Are we talking to the right people? If you go all the way back to like third or fourth slide, it's about when we do it, it's about who we do it with, and about how we manage this planning process. Understanding the driving forces and the driving forces to me about doing the right thing at the right time with the right people leads to what I think you all probably want to encourage your organizations to be able to say, we're best in class. And if you say I'm best in class, then you have to be able to validate it, right? So, when is it best to plan? How is it best to plan? And who is best to plan with? And if you can answer these questions as to the early part of safety and safety planning, you are beginning to exhibit the qualities of a best-in-class organization. I think as we look at some of these final comments, evaluating the strategic aspects of safety and the advantages of building things in early is strategy. It's not tactics. It's a strategy. Maybe the tactical element is how you get it into a program and how you share it and that kind of stuff. I get it. But a lot of organizations tend to concentrate on the tactical aspect of safety. In other words, here's my PPE, here's my fall protection, all important. I'm not saying it isn't. But the strategy piece, the strategic element, which should be umbrelling all of that, oftentimes almost takes a back seat. And I think my encouragement is that if we use, again, kind of an analogy, you build your safety program and you build your early intervention and embedding safety into the process. That's a strategic approach. And strategy has a couple of implications, doesn't it? It's what leaders do. Leaders are responsible for the strategy to move their organizations and people in a common direction to accomplish a common goal and mission. And that's not a tactic, that's a strategy. It's what you do versus how you do it. So I think distinguishing these two things, especially as we're trying to incorporate safety early and early and earlier in the process, becomes important. And as I say in point B there, remember that leadership coefficient. I didn't define the leadership dialogue early in the talk. I mentioned leadership, whether it's the intention-based leadership of David Marquet's book or leadership that you encourage in your organization. But there is a coefficient that applies. And we can either have that coefficient be one that allows the organization to move smoothly, or we can up that coefficient and try to, in essence, grind things to a not a halt, but make things more difficult. And I think leaders can help overcome that coefficient and make it a little bit smoother piece in transition as we embed safety earlier into our process. Final thoughts. Every organization I know of is either struggling with and embarking on or has gone full tilt boogie on AI. And the only thing I would say is exercise caution. Doesn't mean you're not using it, you probably are. And we certainly are in our organization. But we found that a lot of folks will build safety programs for critical stuff by going out there and say, tell me how to do this. And then I can pick it up and read it. I know it's not them. I know it's AI. So just a little cautionary note that that's not a function of being early. That's a function of we need to exercise caution and make sure we're editing and looking at things we need to do it right. You can be safe. You can work to be safer, and you can be amongst the safest if you wish. You get to make that call. So there's three elements there: safe, safer, safest. Which one do you want to be? And again, I think that's a leadership dynamic. And if you were all in a room, I would say right, and I'd see what your heads were doing. You shaking your head, yes, are you agreeing with me, or going, no, no, that's our safety director's job. Well, he's a leader. He or she's a leader, but at the same time, there's another piece to that, and I think that other piece is everybody on the call, everybody in the organization has a responsibility. I think for those of us that are leaders in the organization, owners in organizations, safety directors in organizations, we have a heightened responsibility to embed safety early and to make sure it works, to cycle it through the project as it moves along, and identify what we can do well and what we need to work on so that we're ready to go for the next one. So that really is what we've talked about, some of my perspectives. I used construction avatars here to kind of talk about where and how and why we embed safety early, and then a little bit about what's next. And I guess my last question is, what would you rather be early or late to dinner? But I'm more of an early guy. But